Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks, Geeta, for letting us know where you're signing in from in the chat. If anyone else, please we'd love to see where you're signing in from. So feel free to use the chat to say hi. Let us know where you're signing in from. And we're just going to wait a couple of, maybe just 1 minute, not even a couple of minutes. And people are still trickling in, and then we're going to get started for today. So, Laxman, if you could maybe put the language slide on, the first one, yes, happy Pride, everyone. We are also acknowledging that it is Pride Month, so just a happy Pride to everyone. And then the first language slide, go up, like, no, it's in the beginning because it's all 3 days. It's right at it's the first slides before day 2. Yeah.
No. This one, sorry.
There we go. Great. Okay, thank you. So welcome, everyone. Great to have you here today. I'm sure more people will join as we get going, but we'll get started anyway. Although to say we are still waiting for one of our speakers, so hopefully that's all going to work out. But in the meantime, I can do a few logistics. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Bianca. I work for the Global Secretariat as the Global Membership Engagement Coordinator, and have been working with the rest of the team to put on this 3-day members assembly. So we are really grateful that you've all joined us again for day 2, where we'll be focusing on decolonization as part of the series around decolonization that we've been working on for the last few months. First thing to say is that we do have live interpretation. So please do select which language you'd like to be hearing in today by clicking that globe icon at the bottom of your screen. And then you select either English, Spanish, or French. And then a reminder also, when you come back from breakout rooms, you will need to reselect your language. So that's otherwise you will not be hearing in the right language again. And then the second slide, please, Laxman, if you could. We also have AI assisted, so it's not perfect, but it is translated captions available. So for that, you would just need to click on the closed captions icon as it shows in the image there, and you click on that, and then you can select from a range of languages there what language you'd like to see your transcripts in. We apologize in advance because they are AI generated, so the likelihood of them being perfect is minimal, but we do hope that they will be helpful for those that aren't wanting Spanish, French, or English. And then one other thing to note before we move on is that I have set up a poll, and it's a trial. I've never done this before. We've never done this before, so we're going to see if it works. But you should have received an option when you came into the room to select what language breakout room you want to be in. If you haven't done that, you just need to click on the polls option at the bottom of your screen, and you'll see the poll. It's live. It'll be live throughout the session, and you can then decide to let us know which language you want to be in for a breakout room. So we will close it, and then we will create breakout rooms, and we go into our first breakout rooms. As I said, it is a trial, so if it doesn't work, we will do something different, but we're going to give it a try because it might be quite helpful as a way to create the breakout rooms. Yep, and with that, I'm going to hand over to our fabulous moderator, Nontokozo, who will lead us into today's session. So thank you again, everyone. Oh, I forgot the participation guidelines. Just a reminder that we're creating safe, inclusive spaces, respectful spaces, positive learning. And so we're asking that everyone is respectful, that we take responsibility for ourselves, that we're inclusive, and that we follow online rules of friendliness. And of course, if needed, we do reserve the right to remove anyone from the room. We've never had to do that, but just in case. And now over to you, Nontokozo.
Thank you, Bianca. This is our 5th session. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's good to see all of you, those that we can see, those who have your cameras on. I'm not sure if, has Tumi arrived?
She is about to join. She should be here any minute.
Okay. That's okay then. So in the meantime, I just want to again welcome everybody. If we could just like maybe take a moment of just silence to arrive and be in the space. If you wish to close your eyes or just look away from the computer just for a moment. Thank you. So we're going to go into small groups and breakout rooms to say hello, how are we landing, and introduce ourselves, where we're from. And then when we come back, we're going to begin with the processes of today. Okay, thank you, Bianca, for organizing. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome back.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hopefully everybody had a chance to say hello just a little bit. Yeah, just to land. Yeah, today's session we have, where's Laxman? I don't see you. We have Laxman with us from the Global Secretariat. And we also have Komanyane from South Africa. And maybe Tumi, if you just take a moment to introduce yourself. And then maybe
Okay.
Laxman, also you can introduce yourself and then we may begin.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Komanyane. I am a close friend and ally of MenEngage, having formerly worked with MenEngage for about 8 years of my professional life. I'm currently overseeing programs focused on ethical engagement of young people. And I'm really, really thrilled to be here with you today.
Thank you, Tumi. Thank you for making the time to be here with us. Laxman, would you like to say a few words about yourself for those who don't know you so well?
Thank you, Nontokozo.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you to me. It's really good to see you after quite some time. Yeah, my name is Laxman, and I am originally from Nepal, but I'm currently based out of Washington, D.C. area, suburb area in the US. I have been with MenEngage since 2003, 2004, starting with being one of the founding group members of the network in Nepal. Then was involved in coordinating the regional network in South Asia for around 4 or 5 years, and was part of MenEngage for quite some time at the global steering committee level. That's what the global leadership group used to be, also together with Tumi, where she was representing the Africa regional network. And I'm currently now with the Global Secretariat. But I'm not wearing the hat of Global Secretariat, just for a sake of clarity at this conversation. And yeah, I think that's really looking forward to this dialogue and reflection. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you, Laxman. And just to dive into it, right? This is our 5th session, as I've already said. And today we're looking more internal. It can be a bit nerve-wracking. But so we're looking at where are we and what have we been, what has been the challenges within MenEngage around this topic of decolonization? What are the challenges? What are the successes? What has happened? What has not happened? And maybe why not? And we don't have to come up with all the solutions. And again, to remind all of us that Tumi and Laxman are not here as experts. They're not here to answer all our questions that we might have. We are here to simply have a dialogue and just share and have a process together. So also to remind the two of you that you are not required to have answers to everything and all the questions that might come up today. So to have grace and compassion for each other. Okay, so I don't know, Tumi, would you like?
Yes.
Maybe, yeah, thank you.
So this is always an interesting conversation to have. And I start any submission with the recognition that we all bring who we are into every space. And so often the experiences around the decolonization conversation can be wrought with emotion. And I say this having had the privilege of working within MenEngage and as a member of Sonke Gender Justice at the time. And much of the discussion point for me resonates in so many ways. When we talk decolonization, it's almost always a very political entry point into issues of development work. And so decolonization by default forces us to really think about positionality, intersectionality, as well as how who we are influences how we show up in spaces. And often, you know, depending on who the audience is, you can decide whether to soften the ground. And this is where we start talking about, oh, are we doing development differently? And this is part of a conversation that started with MenEngage years ago. And from time to time, we'd also kind of, you know, touch on adaptive development, recognizing that we need to really foreground localization in the work we did as MenEngage at the time. But whether did we speak about decolonization in a very political sense, I don't recall, but there were always opportunities to reflect. And so in my reflection of the years spent at MenEngage, there was always an understanding that things had to be done differently. So from a visionary point of view, it was around how, for example, as MenEngage, the theories around engaging of men or male engagement, as well as the beginnings of what then became, you know, the debate around can men engage and male allies and people working in the engagement of men start taking on, I remember vividly, the label of men as feminists. Now, as a Black woman working for MenEngage, and often one who identifies as a feminist, I remember the conflict that I had. I recognized MenEngage as a vehicle was moving towards a very progressive stance around gender equality and gender justice. But were we really ready to have many of our male counterparts or the men in MenEngage calling themselves feminist? Was a debate that many of us had behind closed doors, but it moved so quickly. And I think part of why the men as feminist label and MenEngage really taking center stage in that conversation was also who was leading the conversation. Now, and I just, please pardon me, this is not in any way against any one particular person, but if you think of MenEngage and who really was at the forefront of the work that happened, there was still that stereotype that it had to be the male, the white men within MenEngage who held the decision-making power, who presented the strategies, who kind of really presented to the rest of MenEngage, you know, what's hot, what needs to be taken to the fore, and how the rest of us just need to adapt. I don't recall ever there being a space as to whether the women within MenEngage believed that we were ready to label men as feminists and what that discourse would mean for the work that we were doing. And so it was a very interesting time as a woman working for MenEngage, where sometimes we were seen as the enemies in the feminist spaces because we were seen to literally be sleeping with the enemy, right? But we were also the women whose voices were very powerful around the values of engaging men. But I remember many platforms where I would sit and I would feel sidelined by default because I was seen to be part of the other group that puts forward men, that chooses to be blind to the privilege that men hold by default, and therefore being seen to be part of the vehicle or the patriarchal system that actually enforces patriarchy by speaking on behalf of men as a female, as a feminist, as a Black woman. And so was there good out of that, labeling and thinking about issues of accountability as MenEngage? I think it paved way for some really important conversations, but I still felt that the conversations were not informed at grassroots level, particularly in Africa. I stand corrected as to how that discourse shaped up in other regions. But it really at some point felt like it was a top-down approach. Oh, now we're talking about men as feminists. This is the strategy. These are the plans. This is the advocacy work. But we would then find that as we were implementing work in communities with faith leaders, with chiefs, they couldn't quite relate to the men as feminist label. So I think there's sometimes an issue when we're talking about decolonization that we have in the past put intellectualism or academic theory in front of really practical, homegrown, roots-based solutions. So, and I think that was another thing that often would happen. We were very donor-driven. We were all about approaches, theories, and what needs to happen. But I feel we could have spent better time really sitting in the communities and really making sure that we're filtering and such that the label is not about the technocrats within MenEngage. It's actually a whole community-owned ideal, as well as being able to sustain it. Yeah, so I think I'll start here. I'll stop here for now. And yeah, I mean, I spent so much time and I still am a big proponent of engaging men and young boys, So this is something I could speak to all day.
Thank you. Thank you, Tumi. Thank you for giving us that background. And it's great that it's coming from somebody who was there, from your experience and from what you've seen and what you went through. And it's important that we talk about the history, right? And see, in order to see what we have done and where we're going from there. And I'm really touched by hearing about what you raised in terms of how we take words, academic words, and we want to apply them, and we think they actually fit in every region and in every culture, and in the sake of progress, right? In the sake of wanting to move forward. And yeah, and this doesn't always work, right?
It does. And I think there's also we always say the personal is political, the political is personal, right? Mm-hmm. But I think, let's be fair, when you're sitting with donor requirements, and what has been put to the donor is we can bring utopia to you, right? There's really never enough time to sit with staff or to sit with communities where this work around engaging men sits and really extract that, that kind of thinking. So what we end up doing is we end up designing interventions to convince communities that this is the solution. And often, what you find is that a lot of our solutions or the work we do around engaging men as MenEngage was often short-lived, right? You go in, you train faith leaders, you probably have at most 3 touch points with them and you never go back. But we expect that something that we all recognize as almost inbuilt. It's a socialization process, but we're quick to count the numbers of faith leaders, for example, who we've trained but how many of us have gone back to actually check, was that change sustained? And were they saying the things that we had kind of conditioned them to start saying? Or has the change been able to sustain itself with or without MenEngage? And I think as long as you work in issues of gender, because another dynamic as a woman working in MenEngage was often seeing how, you know, in a meeting, it's simple things that many of us, I think in hindsight, we were like, wait a minute, the women were still expected to sort out the catering at a MenEngage meeting. The women are still kind of expected to take the minutes in a MenEngage meeting. So you even see how the allocation of duties and tasks would somehow still conform along the gender lines, right? But often many of us were afraid to express that, because how dare the women within MenEngage question the men who we know are progressive and are feminist? So it was almost like, whose lens should you use in just even engaging with the men you work with on a daily basis? So, and I think it's a dilemma once again of, we all know the principles, right? Gender justice, gender equality, but sometimes knowing too much means it can also silence you when you now have to hold a counterpart accountable. So how do I say to Laxman, for example, Laxman, I felt that maybe what you did was patriarchal. I cannot even begin to say that, because Laxman knows everything about feminism. Laxman is the mouthpiece for MenEngage. And so I just think it would really be interesting for us to learn from some of those experiences and really start shaping the work with men and boys, which I still maintain is critical, but perhaps for us to go into it with less blind spots about our privilege and the positionality. And I was always also reminded how, even as a woman within MenEngage, being a manager afforded me some level of privilege, but that I was still underprivileged, even with the privilege that I had. So it's just then really helpful as we're thinking about decolonization, and particularly the race issue around who within MenEngage is deemed to be the opinion maker, versus are we recognizing the evolving masculinities within MenEngage that don't fit a certain profile. And this will be maybe my last example, then I can hand over to Laxman. I remember when we were doing some work around men care, you know, the fatherhood project. And when you think back to our publications about what makes a good father, and we used to joke about this, that it's always the sweet, you know, it's typically a blonde, blue-eyed man from the Scandinavian countries who are seen to be examples of fatherhood in its essence, right? And then I remember thinking, I wish I was a writer so I could tell you about the men I've seen in Sierra Leone, who was a man living with disabilities. I think he had suffered from polio, and he was pushing a wooden wheelbarrow and was taking his children to school. And I was like, but this is a man who will never have on a cover of a Men Care report, because he just doesn't fit the profile of the utopia of fatherhood in context. But where we sit, these are the men we live with. These are our husbands, our partners, our brothers, our sons. But I then would often feel that racial tension of how we sometimes put forward the vision of what an ideal man looks like, but we go back into a workshop and we tell women, oh yeah, you know, an ideal man is not just the one with muscles. Men come in all shape and form. But when we do our publications, the ideal man still only fits one form, and it's not that diversity that you're seeing as well. So yeah, those were some of the experiences at the time on some of the work that we were doing.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing so deeply and for such honesty and being vulnerable. Really appreciate that. I think I'm going to pass it to you, Laxman. I think for me right now, the questions that are coming up is how is then the culture? Has it been changing at all? And what are the challenges that are preventing change if things haven't been changing? And what are the steps that you think should be taken to influence this change within the organization? You don't have to answer to those questions, but this is what's brewing inside of me right now. Yes.
Yeah. No, thank you, Tumi, for laying amazing ground. And I completely agree that I think that's how things have been within MenEngage, and being a man in the group that you were referring to as well, but then coming in from a global South country, it became a little more complex as well. No, I think in terms of the overall paradigm, I guess, one disclaimer that I would definitely start with is that MenEngage is not necessarily immune to colonial structure or modality of operation and working and thinking and visualizing our own vision and mission in many ways, right? We are still deeply embedded within that. We haven't been able to, as MenEngage, deconstruct what a decolonial model would look like, right? So I think, that's the start of where we are at MenEngage, is we are still trying. The problem lies within also the very fact that MenEngage, again, is not a very top-down hierarchical entity as it was envisioned. In practice, it did happen that way, as Tumi was saying. We did experience certain sort of very top-down approaches in terms of the way we were organized, the way who was allowed to be part of the decision-making group at the end of the story, whose voices was being heard in the room, and so on, were very, very problematic, right? But I think as MenEngage, the vision, just to lay out in the beginning, when we all were having conversation of what is the intentionality behind having a group or a network as an alliance like MenEngage, as Tumi was in the beginning saying, of a very different nature of entity, which is countering to some of these neo-colonial structures in the name of INGOs, or in the name of regional organizations, or in the name of donor created organizations that were catering to particular narratives of certain donor agency, or a certain narrative of a group coming from somewhere else, right? So I think that was also a very crucial and the phase that we had really a difficulty in envisioning what is an entity then that MenEngage should be aiming to become. There has been instances within MenEngage where there has been pushback from some of the reasons. So I do remember when I was in South Asia, we did have a very interesting conversation as to what does it mean for a network with such a vision and principles that we have laid out for ourselves back then to be then functioning in a particular way, right? So there was a tension within MenEngage. However, that tension never created or led to a resolution of how MenEngage is transformed into being what we started calling as a feminist entity, or a alliance, or a network that is actually led by our members in the ground, right? So the idea was that the MenEngage becomes the other kind of an entity, unlike where the voices from the ground, from the communities, will define who we are, what we do, how we operate, how we make decisions, and so on. But because of the landscape and the reality where MenEngage was even operating within the same neo-colonial donor-centric paradigm, it was a big challenge. And then the decision-making and the decision makers would be then listening more and more to those in the positions of power, and then sort of not really aligning to our own principles. So that I'm laying that as a way, and I think we are still very much in the same paradigm until now. I would not say we have done a fantastic job in terms of where we are standing in terms of decolonizing our practices. But I guess I think what I can definitely assure, and the reason why we initiated this conversation, to put ourselves in a vulnerable situation and be honest with our members, is that we are trying to, sort of walk the talk in what we have said around decolonization, what came out during the symposium, and that the decisions are not only made by the kind of people that are generally holding the fort when it comes to decision making and the positions of power, but then doing sort of challenging that in a very different way, thereby creating more and more opportunities for our members to play more of their role in influencing, in redefining the way we are structured and organized and so on. So MenEngage from the beginning, and that's what at the moment the current leadership is very clear about, is that we never wanted to be another entity that aligns with more the colonial approach and hence becomes a colonial model on itself, where things are decided from a top-down model, but rather a fluid mechanism whereby the leadership remains at the country level. So that's where I think we need to understand. That's why at the global level, when we started, after some of these conversations, to redefine how we are organized globally is to not grow big, right? As MenEngage, as Tumi was saying, engaging boys and men is the hype at the moment. Every donor wants to do that work. If we wanted to be colonial, we would have really done anything to get more and more resources, more and more money, and become more top-down and more aligned to the neo-colonial, sort of economic model, no? But we have been preventing that. So we have been trying to prevent that as much as we can as the global group. And we are trying to also focus and center the voices from the ground more and more. So we are trying to prevent that those of us in the Global Secretariat are not the only ones that become the face, right? So I'm not, so as Laxman, I would not be in all the spaces to be representing MenEngage. We are trying to sort of diversify the faces and the leadership role in all these spaces. But however, again, what becomes really interesting is that being a member-led network, the challenge is that some of the members by default become the face in the sides of donor. And again, relating to reinforcing certain organizations that have been holding the fort, holding the power from Global North and continue to be the face for some reason still. And we are still figuring out how we can challenge that, how we can demystify that more and more in the way that it becomes inclusive, it becomes collaborative, right? While doing it, we also need to uphold what we are calling as feminist principles in how we are organized, how we are shaping, how we are addressing things, right? And I think as MenEngage, I think we still are the point that the intellectualism conversation to me still exists, unfortunately. I think we generally tend to, yesterday also, I was talking with one of the colleagues from the regional network, which, identified as female herself, having the kind of conversation with our regional leaders in one of the regional networks and finding really, really challenging to be in that space up to a level where she came out from the meeting crying, feeling extremely low. And I was there listening to her and realizing what a space it is. And I myself find being one of the leaders in that space, or related to that space, and being awkward in that moment and trying to listen and support her in that experience, but also sort of bring a little more of critiques within how our leaders are showing up in these spaces as well. And I think in that quest, the challenge and dilemma I always have is probably would be good to listen, is that positional, I mean, from an identity perspective, I am a brown person, I'm not a white person, right? And I'm sitting in a global north paradigm at the moment, just because I'm located in the US, I'm working with an organization which is international, by default coined as Global North Organization. But however, and then trying to decolonize and seeing these not right, I would not say wrong, but not right approaches among our leaders in the regions and holding them to account. What does that mean from a decolonization perspective, right? Where does the decolonization becomes a tool in order, or a barrier in order to advance to what we have agreed as our own mission or our own goal? And then the expectations from our own members as well. Sometimes we feel like, oh, MenEngage is big global entity. They can protect us from anything that may come up, and it's MenEngage's obligation to protect us, right? We hear that mentality among our members as well. Whereas MenEngage by default was never set up in a way that becomes this colonial entity that will protect or have the capability to protect everyone in the way they are expecting. MenEngage is a very, sort of at the moment, the way we are trying to shape it is not as a colonial group or colonial entity that will have power to control or protect our colleagues in South Africa, for example, of if they are getting into certain challenging situation, that we will be there to protect them, right? So that protecting paradigm again is a bit more challenging from a decolonial or even patriarchal point of view, right? That's not how MenEngage should be thought of or imagined of, but rather, actually, my understanding of who we are is that we as MenEngage Global are protected by our members. And I'm looking actually towards them to protect us, not the other way around, just because we are a global entity, right? It's a mutual horizontality in that relationship. And we are trying to relocate and reposition ourselves in the way that power lies with our members, not on some of us in the global secretariat or the global board. So these are some of the dilemmas on how do we then operationalize these idealistic or theoretical concepts in practice, right? So, and how do we bring that to our fore? So I'm just putting it out as my own vulnerability with certain experiences all the way from Nepal to now where I am currently located in the Global Secretariat. And then the last point, and I'll stop there, is that, as I said in the first session, decolonization is not just a virtue or a discourse of saying or binarying that global north versus global south. I am from global south, and I am equally part of the colonization model or colonial model in my own country, in my own region as well. I can manifest these colonial modality and representation and power over approaches in my own country itself. So it's not no more about, oh, global north versus global south, but the manifestation, because of the way things have evolved and institutions are shaped, the colonization is manifested within particular regions, within particular country, based on the power that certain organizations, big organizations, or organizations particularly have by virtue of the relationship and access we have with the global power holders. So I think we need to be nuancing of that level, and how do we really address that challenge that exists internally is a question mark. I don't have answers to that either. So yeah, I'll stop there. I think I took more than what I should have.
Thank you so much, Laxman. Thank you for those words of wisdom. I hold grace for your own personal stand in terms of you're a person from Global South, and yet you hold a role within the organization of the Global Secretariat. And at the same time, as you say, you are in the Global North. So it does get complex. And it comes back to that, what you just said now. It's no longer about Global North versus Global South, right? It's also about us. It's also inner work. It's also inner processes. And also what I'm also reading from the chat as well is, how do we take accountability and how do we hold our fellow colleagues accountable? How do we create structures that are creating the right conditions, especially for our female colleagues to be able to give feedback, right? And also to be able to give feedback to whomever we consider to be decision makers or leadership, right? So I feel like that's been called to, in a sense of let's make it clear and let's make it let's create conditions that are easy, because it's not easy. Like Tumi was saying, it's not always easy to give feedback. We know that, right? It's not always easy to call in or call out or call on our colleagues, especially in the spaces where we already know we come together because we are working towards the same goal, but we coming from different backgrounds and our knowledge is not the same. We are not in the same level of understanding. We haven't done the same inner work. So it gets really complex. We might have the same vision. We might agree on paper on certain things, but in practice, it becomes a different and challenging situation, right? So I hold that as well. And I'm hearing that. And I also want to go back to also this, who decides who's a feminist, right? Which connects with allyship, right? In the sense of, because how do you decide that I'm an ally? It's those who are in the margins who decide that you're an ally by watching and experiencing your actions, right? So therefore, with that, I also read a comment that says, well, where we are, it depends on context and country. It's good to say people are feminist because it changes their behavior and the way, but then we're also hearing that, no, you cannot just decide to call yourself a feminist without doing the work, because it requires work, right? It's those who identify as female who then say, this man is a feminist, and we know because of the actions and the way of being, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for raising that. I found that to be very important because, as you said, we can just get lost into words that are academic, that are new, which then connects to funding. I also heard that the sense of funders require certain words and in certain projects, which then limits the way we want to do the work, right? It becomes an obstacle of progress towards proper decolonization and change when we have to conform to what funders are requiring from us, right? So that's also something important to look at. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think with all that, it's been really a lot of information. Maybe Bianca, what do you think? We go to breakout rooms, and then after the breakout rooms, we're gonna take a break, and then we come back to really then go deeper into digestion more and have a discussion about what we've been hearing and what we're feeling also, right? What we're processing in our bodies. What are our thinking processes? What do we think is needed and not needed? Yeah. Welcome back. It gets tricky, right, when we come back from a break, when people don't switch on their cameras, because we don't know who's back and who's not. So we're just gonna go ahead and say hello again and welcome back. So we're just going to open the floor to what's moving. Hola, Adolfo. What's moving? What are our thinking processes? What did we hear? What do we want to share? And if we have questions for Tumi and Laxman as well, we can also ask questions as well. And just remember that they're not obligated to answer those questions. Those questions can just go to the floor and somebody else can pick them up as well. We're not looking for experts. We're just having a discussion on this journey of decolonization together. And to keep it respectful and kind and have grace and compassion. This is, as Tumi also mentioned before, this is an emotional, politics are emotional. So thank you. Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this.
I can't hear you. At least I can't hear you.
Oh, no?
Oh, now I can.
Can you? Okay, so there's just a bit delay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this, once again, inspiring and challenging session. There's so many things I would like to say. Actually, I think I prepared some things that I wanted to share from how we've been working with MenEngage Europe on the topic of anti-racism as a part of a decolonization process. But actually, I feel now that the first question that comes up is actually, because, I mean, we're from Europe, we're from the continent that kind of is responsible for all the colonization and decolonization that we're struggling with, or at least large parts of it. And the conversation so far has been focusing on the role of MenEngage as a global network and the top-down structures. But I think it would be very interesting for us as MenEngage members in Europe, how we can be good allies and partners in decolonization.
Just a moment, Jens, please.
Yeah.
Somebody's mic is on.
Yes, I hear.
Okay. Could we switch off our mics? Thank you.
So my question would be, how can we be best allies, partners in this global decolonization process that we're all in, or that we should be in? Because we are in the, what is the word for that? We're in the place where still a lot of the donor-driven and donor centrality and etc. comes from. And I mean, and then to share something about our own struggle, we have been in the process and still are struggling and trying to find our way in a process around anti-racism for various reasons, but clearly because racism has been a growing problem in our countries, and also because we realize that unconscious bias and racism are also and colonization dynamics also play a role in our internal structures and dynamics. So we've been having meetings about this. We created a statement of intent. We've been working with you, Nontokozo, a few times, and we're still trying to find our way in that. And seeing that there are so many dimensions to this in wanting to be accountable and take responsibility in these global dynamics and power relations, and at the same time seeing that part of our work sometimes is being framed in racist frames about violent masculinity being related or being seen as mainly a problem of refugees coming to conquer our countries or whatever. So, and then seeing that our own structures also lead to at least MenEngage steering committee being predominantly white. And so what I'm saying is we have actually a lot of questions around this, how to proceed. And in the global arena that we've been discussing so far, I really think it would be good to see this as also a global challenge and to ask, how can we best take on our role as a European network? Knowing also that the organizations in Europe are also, like many of us around the world, are always in survival mode, struggling for funding, dealing with problems that are way bigger than we actually can cope to deal with. Yeah, so I have no answers. I have a lot of questions, and I do realize that sitting with those questions and embracing the discomfort is part of the process. And I would like this to be part of the global conversation within MenEngage. Thank you. And please, my European colleagues from the working group or secretariat, if you want to add to this attempt to share something, please do so.
Thank you, Jens. Is there anybody from Europe who wants to add? No. Thank you. And we have Ruben. I see Ruben, your hand.
Sí. Bueno, a mí yo quisiera comentar un poco el tema de las dinámicas de poder entre hombres y mujeres en organizaciones que promueven la equidad. A propósito de lo que mencionaba Tumi, respecto a las dificultades que a veces sentía en MenEngage para, digamos, plantear crítica, dar, digamos, retroalimentación a quienes eran sus jefes, ¿no? Entonces, lo que quería decir es que, bueno, mi experiencia personal, que yo trabajé el tema de masculinidad con una organización feminista. Mis colegas, eso era una organización que era liderada por mujeres, y dentro de esa organización habíamos algunos hombres trabajando con hombres. Entonces, en esta organización, las mujeres no tenían ningún problema para decirnos las cosas que a ellas les parecían machistas o patriarcales. De forma directa, ¿no? O sea, no había ahí ningún problema con eso. Entonces me parece que tiene que ver con organizaciones que son lideradas por hombres. Entonces aquí la pregunta es cómo se pueden crear en una organización liderada por hombres las condiciones para que las mujeres, especialmente si es una organización que trabaja contra el patriarcado, ¿no? Para desmontar la desigualdad, cómo se pueden crear las condiciones para que las mujeres puedan ser escuchadas en una organización que es liderada por hombres.
Thank you for that question. It's a really good question, right? How do we create a safety for feedback loop? And I think for me, what comes after that also, it's not just feedback. And then how do we create spaces for reparations as well, right? Because when there's feedback, that means some harm has already been done. So where do we go to heal that as well? Do we create groups? What is the systems that we create for that as well? So for me, feedback goes with the healing space as well. Does anybody want to maybe answer that? We don't have to, but it's many questions are coming up, which is good.
Yeah. I'm happy to take a stab at some. Firstly, just to say thank you to everyone. I've read the comments. I've Google translated the others. So thank you so much for the feedback. You know, a couple of themes emerge, and maybe just allow me to start with Ruben's question. And a lot of the times, it comes in the same conversation around shared leadership, shared power, co-leadership. And I'm often left wondering that, and I think it's also a comment that someone made earlier in the chat box, that actions speak louder than words. So once again, I think in this space, in development in general, and not just MenEngage, we're very quick to go with what's hot. You know, if the hard thing is shared leadership or co-leadership or co-directors, we do it. And then we almost expect that the building blocks and the thinking comes after. And that's why we always find ourselves in these conditions. So the allure of shared leadership, in my opinion, often it's done because it's just aesthetically pleasing. It's a nice picture. Oh, we have an NGO, and we've got 2 co-directors, one is male, one is female, and it just looks good. But the real work is hardly done. And often when I see conversations about shared space, and I'm like, well, yes, ideally that's good, but what does it practically mean? A woman in a leadership position, shared or not, has very different needs compared to a man in a leadership position. So what we've seen over time is where you get female executives or female EDs or even female program managers like myself, where the organization has met the quota. Yes, we've got women in leadership. Yes, we've got a woman running multiple programs, whatever the case. But how I show up in that space is often the blind spot, right? As a woman, I could be a manager, I could take care of programs, but I'm also dealing with what does motherhood demand of me? What does my presence in a work environment demand of me? And therefore, how I show up in a shared space is very different. And I think as MenEngage, it's an opportunity for us to reflect on if there was a compendium of shared spaces, what would MenEngage's submission to that compendium be? What would we be able to define as a shared space in a gender equitable manner? And so for me, that's the one thing. A shared space is not shared until we can level the play field. And this is possibly one exercise we've all done in communities. And there used to be a running joke that, we always know that communities need gender 101. But if we were to assess us as MenEngage, would we all have the same gender 101 in terms of knowledge around these issues of equity vis-a-vis equality? And so for me, in terms of what Ruben was saying, even around feminism or men in feminist spaces or men working in organizations where there are women leaders, it's also it's a very interesting dynamic. There are regions where feminism has moved and progressed so much that men entering that space is not feared, right? It's ripe. They're in a ripe environment for that to happen. And then there are spaces where men even taking up the feminist label, it's just premature. So I think also as MenEngage, something to really put into consideration is that spaces, contexts really matter in the decolonization agenda. But where we take up blanket statements, oh, men as feminists, or how as MenEngage, we all rallied around the he for she campaign. But where there was dissent on the he for she campaign, for example, I remember at the time, it was once again a very intellectual conversation. And I think I, for one, I still battle with the concept of men as feminists because the bar is set so low for a man to take on a feminist label compared to when a woman wants to call herself a feminist. So it's almost like, oh, if a man is okay, you want to be a feminist, cool. Here's a t-shirt, sign a declaration, go stand in front of the he for she image, take a picture, you're a feminist. You get your Justin Trudeau's who will label these world global leaders in feminism. But as a woman, you being a feminist is not as easy as just donning I'm a feminist t-shirt. And I think that's another space where MenEngage has such potential to describe, how the entries or the barriers to feminism, to gender equality or equity, whatever it is, really need to evolve beyond the colonial setup, beyond the patriarchal setup, and just really recognize how even as a collective, we've sometimes supported campaigns that are by nature very problematic because the entry points for men and women are very different. and the bar is usually lower than for the other people. And then I think, and in this part, I think it also covers some of the comments that Jens had about just some of the thinking that's happening in Europe. I've always believed that, you know, there are three kinds of people. There's a person who knows they're privileged, denies the privilege, but is really willing to benefit from that privilege, right? Then you have a person who knows that privilege, but really don't do anything about it. You know, if there's a conversation, they're always on the border. Oh, well, it wasn't me who was being racist, therefore I'm okay. Then you have somebody who recognizes that privilege and uses that privilege to change the narrative. And I think what Europe is doing, what MenEngage Europe is doing, and what actually this whole series around decolonization that you've all put together is perhaps a recognition that any constitution that brings together men recognizes already the privilege that men have, and therefore using that privilege to change systems, to change the status quo. If MenEngage had said, hold on, he for she is problematic, let's rather think about how easy it is for a man to take on a feminist label, the campaign would have probably changed. And so I think, you know, we just sometimes need to stop and reflect. You can be born into privilege, but you can also use privilege to change how things are done. And I think dialogue is one way, conversations, listening, but also not feeling that feedback is an attack on the person, but rather how do we all collectively work on responding to a system. And I was really dying to use this he for she campaign example, because I see how even in communities, it's literally, you know, sign a piece of paper, wear a t-shirt, you're a he for she champion. And you know, from really a pragmatic point of view, and as a practitioner and working in communities, I often feel that even as a feminist, life is not that easy for us in feminism as women. And so in our pursuit for men to take on the language of feminist work, of gender equality, of social norms transformation, it's okay to create an enabling environment for that to happen, but let's not perpetuate it by making that, you know, some of us get an easy way in and others don't. And this speaks even to how else do we inform the donor relations? Once again, privilege, right? Privilege opens doors. So as MenEngage, there are some of us who will have the language, the technical know-how, and sometimes even the race to open the door and get a meeting with a certain group of people. What really matters is what is the agenda that we're bringing into that space. And for me, it's always that being able to reflect and recognize who's not in the room with me, what needs to be said, and what are the discomforts that I might have to deal with in the privilege that I have in order to break ground and open spaces for better engagement. So I think there's an opportunity for all of us to really acknowledge the positionality we have and to explore ways in which we can bring it to the fore. And then finally, but what this doesn't mean, for example, is not us writing speeches for people who don't speak English or for people who don't speak, you know, what is considered the mainstream languages. I've struggled where there's a donor meeting and someone says, oh, can I tell you what you should go say? No, that is not opening a space up. That is us creating clones and perpetuating that colonization, that how you speak, how you know, how you enunciate is what is needed in a meeting room. And I think that's another space that MenEngage has such potential to really undo, you know, that everyone's identity is worthy. We don't need to speak and write for and prepare speaking notes for people so they sound like the writer in the room, but rather we create spaces for them to enter a room at their most authentic self. So I think those are just some ideas I would share around the same.
Thank you so much, Tumi. Wow. I'm hearing a lot of intersectionality there. And I'm also hearing a lot of calling on, not calling out, but calling on and saying, let's stop wearing t-shirts and taking pictures. Let's do the groundwork. Let's do the real thing, right? If you're not ready to do the work, don't do campaigns that you're not ready to back them up and that are sustainable, because it creates a space of uncomfortability, and I can go as far as maybe violence, because other people getting hurt by what they see and are experiencing. So maybe let's create a culture where we are not only doing things from the intellectual way of thinking, oh, this is what needs to be done, but we really do things from the intellectual, but also from grassroots ways of thinking, like really be on the ground and back it up with action and lasting action as well. And I'm also hearing knowing your privileges and knowing how to use your privilege, right? And that reminds me of the power and rank sessions that we've done before, where you do your map of privilege and how to use your privilege. And for what are you using? For what cause are you using your privileges for? There's a lot of amazing, interesting conversations happening on the chat as well. And I don't see any hands. I don't see everybody on the screen. So if you have something to say, a comment and a process, please just unmute yourself and share with us.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to jump in as well. No, I think, again, thank you to me. I think those are really things that we do have to sit with. So literally to me, I think your points, for me, I'm definitely hearing and will sit with them to unpack what that means in practice, right? But I think to the point about the questions of men versus women, one point that I do want to bring it up in this conversation in the decolonization perspective is that, yes, there is a patriarchal power dynamics, but I think more and more there is a nuances to that intersectionality as well. So it's not just simply men versus women, but it is more about power, as Megal has put out in the chat earlier as well, is that it's to dismantle power. So I think as MenEngage, it is time for us to think, earlier to me, you may remember that, I think in our regional groups, when we talk about leadership and it is about MenEngage and we would, jump around, oh, it's men's space and hence men need to be in the leadership, right? And we kind of pushed back a lot on that kind of mentality of, oh, this is about men and boys and hence men and boys need to be in the leadership role. And that's where I think we challenged a bit. And also would like to acknowledge here, I think as MenEngage, at the moment, we have one of the global co-chairs, a female identified individual for the first time. And I think it's a movement where, and the women from Global South, right? So I think it's also creating and walking the talk in that way that, sort of challenges the kind of organizing that is happening even at national, regional or global levels. And as we are saying, we are decentralized model. We are not a typical, sort of a INGO model as such. We really, really don't want to be going into that direction, which we are coining it as NGOization of movements. And that's not what we wanted as MenEngage. But I think time for reflecting at the national and regional level to reflect really on, has there been a challenging of power or patriarchal structure happening at the country level? Yesterday, there was a comment that, and also I see a comment in the chat box, is that sometimes we feel like we create an institution which is very, very patriarchal in terms of the way it is structured. And then we think, oh, let's bring women into the conversation and that will solve, right? And that's not that easy in terms of decolonizing or challenging the patriarchal institutional setup and paradigm. And to that matter, I think within MenEngage also, we currently have a model of co-directorship. So I think just saying here, I think we had at one point in time a female director of the Global Secretariat as well, and Yoni is here, and we all kind of have evolved to become into a co-directorship model as well, right? So I think as MenEngage, one thing the reason of saying all this story is also to say that as MenEngage, we also need to walk the talk in terms of our leaderships that we see at the country, regional, and global level, and that be in a meaningful leadership opportunities way. And it's all about challenging the culture that we are generally used to and bring up the true anti-colonial, anti-patriarchal culture in the spaces we are here. So, right, so I think how do we do that is something we need to really reflect on. And I think also the fact that is, again, happening at the country level, at the regional level as well. So it's not only talking about higher up there, it is happening in our spaces, all of us that we are in. So it's a moment where we need to have that critical reflection. And also the point to stop after this is that in this conversation, we continuously reinforce gender binary. And again, to be kept in mind, gender binary is another patriarchal and colonial construct. And we do need to challenge this understanding if we are really trying to be decolonized or decolonization as an agenda. We do need to challenge this binarying and othering of individuals and identities that may not fit to a certain colonial narrative. And how does then MenEngage challenge that? And I think as much as we look at external, to me, to look at whether E4C or other campaigns, I also feel as person coming from country level to now where I am, feel like within MenEngage, it's a movement that we really critically reflect and sit with discomfort, as Jens, you are saying, with the way we are structured ourselves, the way we are creating our spaces, and think differently.
Thank you so much, Laxman. Wow, it's always rich, right? It's always, I always feel like, wow, we going in so many deep directions, and then the time also is like chasing after us. So I see 3 hands, and the first one was, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, is Sri Kumar. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm speaking from India currently. I'm a research scholar working from a central university, JNU, working on masculinity studies among young boys who go to school. Now, in the conversation from the last 2 days, and it's really, I mean, academically also rich, and I could understand the global funding yesterday, the patterns and how does neoliberal funding fix. Now, I'm taking a slightly different take here, and these are my observations from the field and with my academic work. I have 2 points to make. One is that when you're looking for decolonization of knowledge production itself, so there is a trend which I feel is at least in northern part of India, my research area, that in the name of traditional knowledge or the right-wing forces and the divisive forces, which is predominantly based upon Hindu-Muslim divide in India, is trying to recapture, it's a backlash. It's a backlash to feminist spaces. I could say it with certain sense of authenticity because I run my own feminist space. It's a reading space. We call it Feminist Fridays. We do readings, and in readings we discuss thinkers who challenge the hegemony. And in India, because it's a slightly different context, more than race, we focus on caste factor, and the patriarchy here is more of a Brahmanical patriarchy. And this is one of my observations from the last 2 days, is the caste axis of intersectionality is not given due weightage at this point. Like we have heard of racial access, and which is equally probably more important. But let's bring to the table the access of the caste. When we're looking at decolonizing, let's also acknowledge the backlash is also it's of course in the larger political discourse of the country or region. But here we really serious threats when we have a reading club. My members are being hackled and once they're group, we have to sometimes cancel our readings. And it comes from the fact that reading. Sorry?
Your sound is not so good.
Okay.
We lost him. Did we lose him, or just me?
I think we've lost him.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. So, so just to summarize my point, it's all I'm saying is one, to look at the caste aspect of masculinity with due weightage, probably give space to it also. And also in terms of backlash, it's a right-wing religious fundamentalist forces which have reached where feminist spaces like Reading Club is consistently on attack, at least the space where I am. So it needs larger, support mechanism, which we I'm not, at least I'm at this stage, I'm not aware of. I'm also new to this organization. I'm still, trying to figure out, but I've been running this space for the last 1 year with college students, with school students. And the more our presence increases on social media, and it's translating into physical threats now. So this is also, just sharing my anxieties around the topic, how, I feel around the last 2 days of discussion. Thank you for, sharing and listening to it.
Thank you so much for sharing your anxieties and the violence that happens around the work that you do. It gives us context, right? In different regions, different things are happening. And we cannot have one solution, right? We cannot reach one solution. We need to look at the different context of the different regions, which requires a lot of work and a lot of patience to be able to do that so we can support each other. Yoni, I think you're next. I only see you.
Yeah, thank you. There was somebody else, but maybe they lowered their hand.
Yes, I saw that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for sharing so far. To start off on a personal note, I always feel incredibly conflicted, or more and more conflicted, about whether to say something in spaces or not. And I saw somebody mentioning that in the comment box as well. So what is a useful role for me, or what do I speak up, or do I take responsibility and speak, or do I just sit and listen? And so I'm always conflicted about what to do. But I want to take responsibility also by sharing something. I hope everybody saw the quote from Amilcar in the chat. I found that really, really relevant for the conversation we're having, and maybe he would want to speak to it himself as well. But he wrote that accountability is more than commitment to values. It's an ethic and a way of communicating and relating to each other. And I've been sitting with that, since the beginning of the conversation, actually, and just listening to our own reflections about what we've been doing as MenEngage Alliance. I think we've done a lot to put kind of the right technical things in place to address power dynamics, whether you call that decolonization or whether you call it, addressing the patriarchy. Just looking at power dynamics, I think from an intersectional perspective, whether we didn't call it that way earlier, but trying to diversify the leadership, making sure that it's not always the same people speaking, but giving more people the opportunity to speak and to represent the alliance. to center accountability, initially to the women's movement, and I think in the feminist movement, and we've, you know, been broadening that up. And then the whole process that we went through to articulate our updated values and principles. And it has started to feel that even though we put all of that in place, there's still much that goes wrong on a daily level, and how we fail and we fall and we struggle. And so why it resonated so much with me, what Amilcar was saying, was that in the end, you know, I think doing the technical things and putting the right things in place and articulating what we stand for, it has its values, it's important, but it is about, you know, how we show up in our interactions with each other every day, and what kind of alternatives, I think, of leadership. And leadership is what everybody has, no, in every space where we're at. What do we model and how do we relate to each other? And I think that for me is just one of the key takeaways from today, and for, yeah, taking forward as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Yanni. We have 5 minutes. Well, about 6 minutes. So if there's any last comment, something that is burning, that somebody wants to share. Maybe somebody from another language. Somebody that doesn't speak English. Okay. Silence is good also. We've said a lot. A lot to think about, a lot to process, and a lot of questions that remain unanswered, which is okay. So I don't know, do you have something?
No,
Yes, Magali, yes, thank you.
Voy a hablar en español porque quiero, si puede, cambiar. Por lo de...
Por favor.
Lo que dijo Rubén, una de sus preguntas muy interesante para mí fue de, bueno, en una organización liderada por hombres, que es diferente de una organización liderada por mujeres, ¿cómo es que se produce el cambio, ¿no? Y porque, como había dicho, las mujeres con quien él trabajaba no tenían ningún problema en confrontarles y decirles, no, eso no, así no puedes, y queda muy directamente. Y esto es muy común en mi experiencia dentro de las organizaciones feministas también. Y noto mucho la diferencia. Una cosa que yo he experimentado en otras organizaciones lideradas por hombres, aunque organizaciones lideradas por hombres que quieren ser más feministas, es que cuando se confronta de una manera muy casi agresiva, digamos, porque muchas veces la confrontación suena como una cosa más agresiva, la respuesta que viene del liderazgo más masculino, más patriarcal, digamos, puede ser una mujer, pero más patriarcal. Bueno, acá no es así que se hace, o acá trabajamos de otra forma, o tenemos otros mecanismos. Entonces, es una forma de impedir el cambio, ¿no? de cómo las cosas se hacen, porque al escuchar la crítica, no se realmente escucha. Se escucha, pero dice, sí, yo entiendo de dónde vienes, pero acá no, acá lo hacemos distinto. Entonces, yo creo que este es uno de los retos para las organizaciones que tienen una cultura más colonial arraigada, ¿no? De permitirse decir, bueno, así lo hacíamos hasta ahora, pero ya que hay otras oportunidades, vamos a mirar para ver cómo es, ¿no? Pero eso no quiere decir que, bueno, la visión y el compromiso que tenemos de dónde queremos llegar o lo que queremos hacer, se va a cambiar porque ahora se quiere hacer diferente, ¿no? Entonces hay que ver cómo cómo es que se puede consolidar dónde queremos llegar en términos de valores y principios, cómo hemos hecho hasta ahora y cuáles son y escuchar verdaderamente las críticas para saber cómo cambiar, qué es que vale la pena cambiar, porque sí se va a llegar más efectivamente a donde queremos llegar. Entonces, agradezco por tu pregunta porque no es simple, pero creo que hay que reflexionar sobre eso. Gracias, Rubén.
Thank you, Magali. Wow, that was a mouthful. It's a lot. We are on time, and I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for showing up for these difficult conversations, for not running away, for sticking with it, for sharing your thinking processes. And mostly thank you to Tumi and Laxman for agreeing to be here today with us, and not only sharing your personal experiences, with which I might think it must be difficult, it's not easy at all, but also speaking your truth and being honest with your processes. And I'm going to pass it to Bianca.
Great. Thank you so much, Nontokozo. Thank you, Tumi and Laxman. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. A reminder, this is the second day of the Members' Assembly. So tomorrow is the last day. It'll be a members-only session, which is different to yesterday and today. So we hope to see you there. We have planned, we are at time, so I'm going to sort of do this as a voluntary, it's up to you. There is an option now, if you would like to stay and you have some time, to meet each other. There's no specific guidance in this part of this. Let me start again. There's no specific guidance for this part and for this breakout, but rather you could talk about what came up today, or you could just connect in with each other, introduce yourselves, get to know a new person, get to know another member perhaps, or if they aren't a member, somebody that is aligned with the work that we're all doing. And so I'm going to open up the breakout rooms. Before I do, just to say thank you to everyone. We're in a way going to close as well so that we do end on time. And so do feel free that if you do need to leave, that you can leave. I'm going to open the breakout rooms. It will be the same as before, where you have, bye to me, thanks so much, where you do have the option to select your own room based on your language. I'm going to say again, I would suggest, even if you start a room, you probably won't be alone for very long, but we keep ending up with these really big rooms and lots of empty rooms. If you do want to meet each other, I would suggest looking for ones that have got 2 or 3 in them at the most. And the rooms will be open for 15 minutes. So I will do that in a second. And then when we come back from the breakout rooms, this room stays open until 11. So 11 my time, sorry. So for the next sort of 45 minutes after that. If there is anyone that is wanting to engage on any of the things that have come up today or anything else, then we invite you to, or if you want to ask any questions or share something with other members, we invite you to stay. It is definitely not required. It's just an extra opportunity in case there is anyone that wants to stay on. So thank you, everyone. It's been wonderful to have you all here today. We look forward to seeing the members tomorrow. I'm going to open the breakout rooms now. Of course, again, stay, don't stay, whatever works well for you. But thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you to the translators.
Yes. Oh, yes. And thank you to the translators. Thank you. Bye, everyone.